Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
And all the ridiculous stories in between.
Welcome back to the Beyond Body podcast. So as you would all be aware, the subject matter of the podcast, it is eating disorders and all things recovery, but more recently, Mia and I have been expanding that to issues that are just more broadly experienced, because I think we notice so many of the themes that our clients experience through treatment and beyond, they're not just eating disorder specific issues, they're just human issues. So today is going to be a bit of an extension of that. We're going to be exploring a wider landscape of issues that just hit home to so many, particularly the younger generation. So today we've got a very exciting guest with us. Byron Dempsey, who is the founder of Driven Young, is joining us. And he's here to have a bit of a chat about his work in the world and how he's filling a really invaluable gap for those who are in their late teens and 20s, who, of course, are not only navigating, creating a sense of self, but, of course, also simultaneously the pressures of adulthood and mental health and coming of age. So, Byron, it is so lovely to have you.
What an amazing intro. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Very exciting.
It's always nice when you can be here for your own intro.
Yeah, I know. Wow. I haven't had that for a while. I haven't done podcasts for a while. So it's very, very nice.
Well, I believe you've just completed a Driven Young retreat in Bali. How was it?
Yes. Yeah, it was awesome. It was our first one. It was a bit of a tester. Had a lot of team members there, and obviously, paid members as well. And it was a lot of fun. Yeah. It was nice because my opening weekend of my program is so jam-packed. It was nice to kind of spread that out in a retreat space. And we got into a lot of different ideas mixed in with fun. It was awesome. Everyone loved it. We're doing a little catch-up Zoom tonight at 7 to just see how everyone's feeling, because it was definitely humbling to go back to reality after spending a week in this kind of paradise where all your food and everything's organized. So It was really good though. It was great.
Amazing. Well, for any of our listeners who haven't come across Driven Young, could you maybe just give us a bit of an understanding about what it actually is and and also why it came into the world?
Yeah, sure. So Driven Young is a company. Our main thing is our flagship program, which is the Driven Young program. It's currently a 4-week personal development and social program for people in their 20s. And we always say the 4 outcomes of the program. We give people way more confidence, a lot more clarity around their finances and their goals and who they want to be. We give them deep connections and community. So the 4 C's: confidence, clarity, connection, and community. And we do that through a variety of different events over a month. We run around 12 to 15 events throughout the month, all designed to fit within a 9 to 5 or a full-time schedule. Mm-hmm. And it's a mix of personal development, social events, and workshops. So teaching, learning, and having fun. And it's really targeting people in their 20s. So we have as young as 18, but mainly people in their 20 to 30 demographic. And yeah, usually they're working and they're a little bit stuck in the day-to-day. They're not feeling really fulfilled. Obviously, I think COVID played a big role in impacting people in the early 20s when it comes to, I would say they're usually not lonely, but they're experiencing symptoms of loneliness. They might not have the friendships they desire. And that's a big thing they're looking for. And so we do this program where we build a community. They get to learn some things about themselves, and it kind of lights a bit of a fire under them if they're willing to take that and run with it. And that's the main thing we do. I also have the Driven Young podcast, which is where it all started, with the podcast teaching anything relevant to people in their 20s, practical life skills. I'm big on, I think a lot of what we learned in school was not super relevant to the modern world. So that was kind of where Driven Young originally started, back when I was kind of 19, 20, going, a lot of people seem to have the same thought that what we learned isn't that relevant. And so now we're growing. We're launching Brisbane. We're currently running in Sydney and Melbourne. We're doing 9 programs this year. We want to do 9 to 12 next year, looking at launching some other things. And it's exciting.
I think it's amazing. When we, found out what you were doing, and it's through somebody who works for us and, had just such an incredible experience with you, it touched on, an area that I think a lot of people are very, even people within the mental health space who have been working in advocacy and activism and programs for years, this gap with loneliness, that it is our biggest epidemic. It affects so many people worldwide. It is such a deadly element that nobody talks about. There's a lot of epidemics we talk about. This is not one of them. And certainly COVID exacerbated that, but we knew it was an issue even before the advent of COVID. So the fact that you've actually been able to identify even those 4 C's, we love an acronym, and actually be able to target those areas specifically And I'm thinking about some of those things. I'm going back to my 20s and going, yeah, finances, tick, could have used that. Some of those like core value pieces of work, that would have been something that would have made a huge difference to my development. It sounds like this is, really born out of, your desire to sort of go back and fill the gap for people going through that period of their life. What is sort of the genesis or the origin of your mission? Like, what inspired all of this for you? What was it maybe in your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was just that. It was my own experience. I think the podcast came because I started having conversations and I realized that, yeah, a lot of what we learned in school was not that relevant. I wasn't sure where to find it. Obviously, YouTube was a big avenue. But it's very Americanized, YouTube. And when we're talking about finances and you're talking about like, there's not many videos for like Australia's system. There is now, but this is 4 or 5 years ago now. And so, yeah, I was like, well, I can interview people. I'm not an expert, but I can talk about mental health because I can bring on a mental health expert. And I really put it from a lens of like, I try and make it very conversational, make it fun. And then COVID absolutely shined a light on the loneliness. I think an idea I talk about a lot is 6 out of 10 friends. I think most people have people in their life, but I think a lot of people have a 6 out of 10 friend where it's like, they're not toxic and bad, but they're not amazing. And you get stuck with these people because there's no reason to leave and they're comfortable. And they're not 6 out of 10 people. It's just your relationship with them is a 6 out of 10. And I think the best example from my life and most people's life is like high school friends. Like I got my high school mates. I'm still mates with them. I love to hang out with them. But for 3-4 years after high school, it took me months to hang out with them. And I feel like I've got friends, but I never really get to see them. And it was a bit of a 6 out of 10 relationship. So I think that's how I felt for a long time. I thought making friends would happen organically. I tried Bumble BFF. I tried meetup.com. I tried Facebook groups and none of them really worked. I Googled how to make friends, which is tragic and sad, but that's the reality. And I looked for groups on how to connect. And then I think all of that came to the surface when COVID hit. And it wasn't just me who was lonely, but like I realized like everyone was. And originally I had this idea called the Intentional Gap Year Program. And originally it was called a gap year program for people after high school because I'm passionate. I think gap years is a great thing to do. And the issue with gap years is a lot of people go, but what do I do for a year? And I said, well, join my program and we can make it intentional. We can work and travel and these sorts of things. And I still think it's a great idea, but it's a huge monster to pull off. And I ended up pivoting to people in their 20s and we kind of condensed it down to a program and it evolved over many iterations to where it is today. So yeah, a lot of my own experiences and just conversations with other people and seeing the pain points I had and all the stuff I was dealing with the podcast made me realize this is something that's needed.
Absolutely. I think that piece about connection, it's just so powerful. Mia and I actually just finished doing a 3-part podcast, little few episodes of interviewing our best friends to talk about that, the importance of having quality friendships. I love that 6 out of 10 friend, because I think it's so easy, particularly if you've had a connection with someone for a long time, that you don't really challenge, this is serving me or is this not serving me, but rather it just becomes a really passive relationship. And I think particularly the person whom we found out about you through, one of her biggest takeaways was the connection she had with other people, because she shared that there were so many different people who were there that had come from all these different walks of life, but they all had this very intentional shared purpose of wanting to create deeper connection. So that was one of the biggest things she took out of it. And I think, of course, because of social media as well as COVID, so many of these issues that young people are facing, they're such collective issues. And I think Mira and I see that in our space, in our work all the time. I would say, most of our clients are really struggling with loneliness or have struggled with loneliness on some level.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stats don't lie. Like I can reference a lot of different things, but I'll reference my own because I've been doing a big study over the last 6 months. We've had over almost 4,000 young Australians take a 40-part survey and quiz, which has been really cool. And I've asked a lot of questions like, how often do you feel lonely in the last 2 weeks and those sorts of things. And, usually from all the stats I've seen, it sits around 30 to 40% usually leans towards like often or constant or like very lonely.
Wow.
And which is a huge percentage, anywhere from 30 to 40%. And that's just way too high. And loneliness has been linked to, it doesn't take a genius, or we don't need a psychologist to tell us, but loneliness has impacts to my mental health. Like everyone knows that. And there's a quote I love from one of my members who shared a review, really good review, Ali. She was really sweet, like I think early 20s. And she was like, this program has done so much more for me than sitting in a therapist's office talking about being lonely. I actually went out there and stopped being lonely.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think it's a big issue a lot of young people go with. They get caught up in, you actually have to get out there and do it.
Mm.
Like therapy is great and there's a time and space for it, but you got to go and do what you're being told to do. Like you got to go out there and action it, and that's uncomfortable. And that's what I like about the program. I like rip people out of their comfort zone. Like it's not so much teaching, although we do teach. It's more like doing and making them actually do what we say. We like when we say we're going to make connections, I sit them down. I'll give them a question. Like I sit down, all right, in your group, here's a question to ask each other. And it's a deep question. And that starts it off. And we get more and more deeper to the point where they're doing 1 to 2 hours in these big groups, discussing ideas and like, getting that connection that people want.
Yeah, you are speaking our language, Byron. That's what we do. We get people uncomfortable and we get them to do the stuff that they tell themselves they can't or they shouldn't or they won't. And I think it's especially at that age, because I often will talk about my own recovery from my eating disorder as a gift for this reason, that when you are forced into a corner and you have to fight your way out, to fight for your life and for survival, you have to push yourself past your comfort zone almost, minute to minute, day to day. And a lot of people are never forced into that situation where they have to put the hard work in before they get the reward. They have to walk through the discomfort before they get the prize at the end. And this is the cornerstone of all the most important necessary areas of our life, is that is the price you pay for the things we also deeply want. Relationships are hard. Career is hard. All of these things that, we all coulda, shoulda, woulda. That's what I want. I want to wake up Monday and feel differently. I want to wake up Monday and have a different social circle. I want to feel connected. I want to be successful, whatever it is. This is the formula. It's discomfort first, reward later. So to be teaching that as a skill where someone doesn't have to end up with an eating disorder and coming out swinging for their life is going to be so preventative in so many ways. It's incredibly powerful.
Well, let me give you an example. Like on that, actually, and one of my theories to why a lot of people aren't getting outside their comfort zone. There's a lot of reasons, but especially in context of people in their 20s. There's a guy called Jesse Martin. You may remember, you would have been really young. In 1999, he was the youngest person ever in the world to sail around the world solo. He did it. He's Australian. He sailed from Sydney, went all around the whole world, back to Sydney. Took him 11 months. And he was like, I think 17 or 16. And someone interviewed him and he said, how come you were able to do this? Like, why didn't you give up? And he said, I did give up. I gave up many times. However, I was 3 weeks away from land and I'd start heading back to land. Then the sun will come out, the dolphins are jumping out of the water and I feel better. And I kept going. And he says, I think the reason I didn't give up is because I didn't have any exits. And a big reason a lot of us are not getting outside of comfort zone or achieving what we want to achieve is because this generation, we have so many exits. It's so easy to just, nope. It's so easy to jump to the phone or like just very, very easy to pull out and not do it. And, that it's tempting, like human nature. We want to take the easy way out. It's what our brain's designed to, keep us safe and take the easy way out. And it's never been harder. Like, I think one of the skills we need to be developing is like discipline around like addiction. Like the whole world is designed to make us very, very, addicted to phone and all these different things. It's like, we really need to be quite disciplined. Otherwise, if you're not focused, I think it's going to really it's impossible to not get addicted to things in the modern world. I feel like I think everyone's addicted to their phone, myself included. And, I'm sure we could list many other things that we struggle with. So yeah, I think it's interesting, the no exits idea.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I really think as a collective, we have very much evolved from being able to be in discomfort to just wanting things to be comfortable. So the idea of like learning to be in discomfort, it's a skill. I think particularly when the modern world, it's pulling us in all these different directions, be comfortable here, be comfortable here. And you're so right, Byron, like no one's going to intentionally stand out in the rain when they could be inside cozy and warm. Like we're always going to choose the thing that makes us feel more comfortable, but you can't grow there. Like there is no growth there. And I think, particularly for young people, their lives are changing so rapidly all the time. And I think this conversation really speaks to the idea that it is experience, right? And discomfort happens through experience. We can sit here and read our textbooks and learn things or go to the therapist and like hear these theories, but ultimately we have to experience that. And that's scary and it feels dangerous and unsafe sometimes. But the only way you're going to learn the skill and it becomes now your lived experience. So that is truth to you. It's kind of like if someone was to say to you, if you touch a fire, you're going to get burned. Sure, that like logically, but until you've touched the fire, that's not your lived experience. So I think it's exactly like that, right? And to do that, we need to be out there and doing these things and having these experiences and falling down and getting back up and doing programs that, like yours, it's the education piece, but it's education plus experience, I think is what is really, really important. And I mean, this is exactly what Mia and I do. We're all about the action stage of recovery and actually helping people take the things that they've learned, because we see in our work, so many people can intellectualize their mental health experience, but that doesn't mean that you're totally right. There's no tangible change in your life. And ultimately, Mia says this all the time, like, you can't think your way out of an eating disorder. And I think that philosophy, it correlates with so many experiences that young people are having. And I'm particularly, I mean, I'm so interested to hear, Byron, from your experience, like you've been dedicated in this space for years now, other than sort of like loneliness and almost this inability to push ourselves out of our comfort zones, what do you think are some of the biggest issues that are influencing young people that are holding them back?
I mean, comfort zones is a huge one, right? And that fits so many things. I always ask every guest on my podcast, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old or like a young person? And I think the most common answer I hear is take risks. Like, because now is the best time to do it. It's like, don't wait until you're 35 and you got kids to take risks. Don't wait until you've got a huge, mortgage and all these responsibilities. Like, I know a lot of young people think life is hard now, but like, I'm sure you guys can speak from experience. It's like, it doesn't get easier, but it can. There's that quote, life doesn't get easier, you get better.
Yeah.
And so, life isn't going to get easier, but if you get better, it can almost become easier, but you're just better at dealing with it. So
Yeah.
I think taking risk is a huge one, which, and to give you an idea of like, when I had this idea around comfort zones, we always say like, when you step outside your comfort zone, you experience all sorts of emotions, anxiety, stress, all these, your heart's racing, you're feeling these things, and they're negative emotions. So we're not going to want to step outside a comfort zone. We summarize them as fear. You step into the fear zone. But if you were to push through the fear zone, you did the thing that you don't want to do, you asked out that person, you played your instrument, whatever it is, how do you feel afterwards? People always say, oh, I feel relieved, I feel proud, I feel incredible. So now we're associating comfort zone with a positive emotion instead of a negative. And whether you step outside your comfort zone, it's not always going to be a good thing. Something might go wrong. But in your 20s and for young people, we're not trying to achieve success. You're trying to achieve growth. And that's how we get to success. And pivoting the idea of failure and succeeding, it shouldn't really exist in your 20s because you're just trialing, you're just figuring it out. So I think a lot of people need to work on a lot of different areas. Mindset, they need to put a lot of time into connecting with people. Like if you look at, I'll ask you guys a bit of a big question, but what do you think are the most important things in life? Like you're on your deathbed. What are the most important things in life?
Absolutely connection, without a doubt. Yeah, making impact.
And the little moments, not the big ones, not the big, expensive, flashy stuff, but the little, just the little memorable flashy.
Yeah. And if you look at what most people probably say, like health, relationships, I think finances is fair to be up there. It's not everything, but it plays a role. And you're right, connections and relationships is a big one. And health, a lot of us invest a lot of time and energy into improving our health. We'll diet, we'll pay for gyms, we'll pay for classes, all these different things. Finances, a lot of people spend a lot of money on their finances and like getting that all sorted, paying advisors, all those sorts of things. But when it comes to connections, people are so like, I'm never going to spend money on making friends. Like they associate it as, I would never do that, because they have this perceived idea that friendship should happen organically, just like it did in Friends and How I Met Your Mother and the sitcoms, which it just doesn't happen that way as much. It doesn't happen as often nowadays. University is not really a place where people connect anymore. It's very, very rare. Like I always ask, so many people didn't make a single friend in university after like 3 or 4 degrees. Like it's so common. I hear that.
From uni, done.
Which is insane. So like the idea that it happens organically is nice. It just doesn't. And so I always say, you got to be willing to invest into friendships. Like find communities, go to the book club, join the run club. Oh, it's $40. You'd spend that on a night out in a heartbeat. Why not do it to meet some people? Like just where our priorities at. So it's a bit of an infinite question. I could talk about what young people need to be focusing on for ages. I think the immediate answer is taking risks, because that encompasses a lot of other stuff.
Totally. And so much of what you're talking about and so much of what we understand of your work is like the core role of values. And like where Holly and I are big on this, on not just like doing an activity where it's like write down 5 of your values and then put it away and never look at it again, but really giving them avenues to like embodying those values and committing to them. I had a conversation with a client recently who said to me, Mia, like I've been living by my core values and it's not shifting all of my internal beliefs about myself. I'm like, that's not what they're meant to do. It's kind of like coping mechanisms. People are like, when are my coping mechanisms going to make me feel great? It's like, that's not their role. Coping mechanisms are there to keep you safe so you can travel through uncomfortable feelings and get out the other side. Values are a compass. You actually commit to them even when you don't want to. So it's actually going to bring up tension and discomfort. And like I said, values is obviously so core to a lot of what you're doing, a lot of what you're speaking about, as well as helping people identify those broader values that we hope people are embodying, but also identifying those for themselves. Why do you think that's such an important piece as people are developing sort of their sense of self, particularly in those really core years, like late teens, 20s?
I think it's important because we don't do it. And so like, I think we should be learning that stuff in school. Like, what are your values? And they don't have to come up with them, but just start having those conversations and having those thoughts. Because as you're right, it's very much a North Star. Like and I love this analogy I heard in an early podcast. And he said, a plane from New York to London, it doesn't go straight from New York to London. It goes off this way, then off this way, depending on the wind and whatnot. But eventually it ends up at London. And so the values is like, when you go off the path, when you go this way, it's kind of the thing that pulls you back to where you want to go. And so figuring out what your values are, it'd be great if you know exactly what they are. But they're always changing, right? Because you're changing, especially in your 20s. So I think it's so important to have those ideas, and it prevents you from doing dumb and stupid mistakes if you're sticking with your values. Like for me, I always think I have such a great mom. And I always think like, is this decision something my mom would be proud of? And whenever I like, is this a smart thing? Is this like a quick thing that's going to make me feel good and make good money now, but it's long term not a good thing? What would my mum think? I know maybe it's silly, but like that's kind of like a little thing for me. And so yeah, I think that conversation saying around values is so important, and it's something we don't do specifically in the program, but we do it by, I think people think about them a lot. We don't do it like, all right, write down your values, but we do a lot of like, all right, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Kind of having those conversations. I think it's so important. And it's really not that hard to do. Like, it doesn't take much, just having those conversations and planting the seeds so people can just be aware of them. I think a lot of people are just kind of like going through life, like, you know, the passenger seat sort of thing, as opposed to sitting in the driver's seat. And I think by identifying those values, you're kind of switching into the driver's seat and taking control.
Absolutely. I think sort of what you're speaking to there as well is this, like the idea of integrity. I love that question. Like, what would mum think? Because I think if you can get to the end of your life and know, hey, I actually lived with integrity, I feel like it doesn't really matter what happened in the context and what built your life. If you can get to the end of your life and know that it was integral and like mum is going to feel pretty good about this, I feel like that's a really beautiful life. I mean, I know clarity is one of the cornerstones of the Driven Young program. Could you just expand a little bit on why do you think it is so important for young people to find clarity? What does that actually mean?
I think it's the dark horse of the 4 C's. It's whenever I ask which one if I could give you one of these C's, it's very rare people pick clarity. But I think it's probably, if not the most important, they're all important, obviously. Yeah. But like clarity, I talk about clarity as like around your finances, clarity around your financial plan, your goals, who you are, like getting clarity around who you are and who you want to be, which is kind of like the values, right? And I could talk about this for ages, but we always talk about like being your authentic self. Like, how often are you your authentic self? Because in life, we all have masks. You might have a mask when you're with your coworkers, and we wear masks because they're there to protect us. Maybe you were being your authentic self and someone made fun of you, so you put on a mask because you don't want that to happen again. But the danger of that is it's exhausting. And like, I'm at the point where I just don't have the energy to be anyone other than who I am, because it's just exhausting. And I'm lucky that I'm in a position where I can kind of surround myself with people that allow me to be authentically me, like 24/7. But I know a lot of people don't have that. So like clarity around that, clarity on your finances, like talking about, if you look at the graphs, like you can pull up like a compound interest graph and you can show the difference of investing from when you're 20 versus like 25. And then like the difference is huge. Like the most valuable thing young people have when it comes to investing is time. That's the biggest advantage we have. And so, you know, getting on top of that as quickly as you can, and not just waiting, oh, I'll sort that out later. Then 20 becomes 25 and 30. And suddenly it's like, what are you doing? You need to get this sorted out. So clarity around a lot of different areas. Goals as well. Goal setting is interesting. I have an interesting relationship with it. I think goal setting can be, I don't know, it's very difficult. I really focus, my whole goal setting workshop is basically just like building habits. Like I drill down, I talk about the danger of goal setting. I go, here's the issue with it. Most people set a big, sexy goal and it's fun, and then they never do the steps to achieve it. And it's just like, you know, it makes you feel good to set it, and then you never get there. Oh, I'll do this by the end of the year. New year, new me. Let's
Yeah.
Let's set this magical goal that I'm not even going to plan out. Whereas really it's like, what are the habits you want to build? Like, what's the one habit this year you want to build that's going to help you get to the life you want to be?
Yeah.
That's more realistic. So clarity is like those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And career, of course, career is a big one, obviously, as well.
Yeah, that purpose piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the clarity is so interesting because particularly with the goal setting, we see this all the time. People set these like, I want to be here. I want to be here in my recovery. I want to be here in my life.
Next week.
Yeah. And ultimately it just starts this perpetual guilt cycle because it shouldn't necessarily be about the final outcome. It's about creating the roadmap of how do we actually get there. Because we talk about this all the time. It's like ultimately if someone is so focused on like, I want to, be making X amount of money by the time I'm 30 or meet these expected timelines of like meeting the perfect partner, buying a house, etc. But they're so focused on this outcome and they're in their 20s. And so like narrow-minded focus on this, they can miss so much of the experience. Because what we're talking
Oh,
about is the
absolutely.
20s is experience. Like it's about saying that spontaneous yes to going on the random holiday to Japan or like going on a random date with someone or just like talking to a stranger and then it could spark up a friendship. Like these are the things that I think really help you gain that sense of self, right? Which was saying like, this is, if we want to be authentic, it's about understanding who you are, not necessarily about how hard you can work to get to the goals. I agree with what you're saying about goal setting. I have a similar sort of feeling towards it. Like we need to have goals. We want to have an overall direction, but we also want to be able to be making the steps every single day to figure out like, hey, well, who the person we're going to be at the end is the person we've been becoming along the way. So if you've been so scared and fragile and not pushing yourself, and ultimately you might get to the goal in 10 years or so, you're still going to be that person who is scared to take risks when you get there, but rather being like, who can we actually become along the way? So I think having that clarity really speaks to that idea, right? Having clarity about what it is that you need to do to get to the goal, not necessarily what is the goal.
Well, a lot of people are winners in their 20s, like huge winners. Oh, when I get this, when I get this, when I get this. Oh, when I graduate, oh, when I finish uni, then I can do this. When I find a partner, when I get my master's degree, oh, when I get a raise, when. And suddenly it's like life has flown past. And one of my favorite quotes is, how you live your days is how you live your life.
Yeah.
And so many people get caught up on the when, the outcome. And the outcome is you're never really satisfied. And science has proven this. There's a thing called the hedonic treadmill, which is this idea where we have a constant baseline happiness. And they've done studies on people who hit the lottery. And what happens? They skyrocket, but eventually they come back down to where they were. They've done studies on people who've lost limbs and gone through like extreme trauma. What happens? They go massively down. But despite all of it, they come back to where they were. And so it's this idea that the big events, like how do we just raise our baseline happiness, not rely on these big events to pull us up for a short period of time and then kind of whiplash us. So the winning is a huge conversation I talk about. Like I do a whole section on that in the goal setting. And I talk about like, don't get caught up on the outcome. It's like The Office. Have you seen The Office?
Yeah.
And at the end of The Office, Andy's like, I wish there was a way to know we're in the good old days before we left them. And it's now. Like I can tell you're in the good old days right now, especially in your 20s. Like might not be the best times of your life, but you're going to look back on these times and be like, the good old days. But you didn't appreciate it because you're too far looking at the future.
Yeah. Well, do you think that when approach could be a form of avoidance? And I ask this because obviously like the when that Mia and I hear all the time is like, oh, when I'm recovered or when I'm this certain weight or when I'm in this ideal body.
When it's ready, when it's easy.
Exactly.
Is there like a moment where you can tell when someone's recovered? Is there like oh, yep, you're recovered? Or is it like,
no,
it's exactly what we're talking about. So everyone's waiting for like their Hogwarts letter to show up and be like,
yeah,
congratulations.
Where's my parade? Where's my bouquet?
It's just time plus evidence and looking back going, I haven't done that or thought that for a while. Oh, great. Oh, my life's better. Oh, it's even better now. Oh, and now I don't even care or think about it. Exactly. So people are building, as you say, people are building up this momentous event. And by the time you get there, it's not as the actual label or the actual finishing line has no relevance or importance because it's actually just the substance of your life that is the reward.
Yes, it's the feeling, right, that you get from that experience, not the experience itself. I think what we always say, it's sort of like as if you see like the last leaf falling off a tree in autumn, like you don't even notice it, but it's there and it's really beautiful. That's kind of what it is like when we're like, yeah, like someone is recovered. There's absolutely no parade. There's no gold star. I mean, maybe we could get you a gold star, but that's
we have to tap them on the shoulder.
The question,
like, I think this might be it. You might be there.
Yeah, especially with something like that, they just got to learn to like just love the process and learn to like enjoy it as you're going through it. Because yeah, it's the same with anything. I mean, it's like if you get a new phone and you're looking after this thing, you've got the case on it, and then 6 months later you're tossing it on your bed. It's the same phone. Same with a car. You get a new car and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you don't care about it in 6 months. Like, it's not the same. I mean, they call it the honeymoon phase in relationships, right? Because we all kind of have this like high, and then you go back to where you were. And so I think once you understand that, my only caveat would be, because I think I've nailed that. The caveat is maybe I don't experience as many highs. Like I don't. And I was talking about this with my mate, because business can be pretty brutal. And so we don't let ourselves get too excited by opportunities until they happen, because we've had so many failed opportunities come through. And so someone will like promise something and I don't even get excited at all until I like it's signed and it's like fully done. So maybe it does limit like the really high emotions, but it does prevent, at least for me, the really low lows. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I guess it depends on your life, but that's kind of how I've been doing it.
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying there. I would also think I would sort of expand on that experience of a high or positive emotion to also include things like contentment, presence, satisfaction, safety, a lot of these
Exactly.
other very human emotions that aren't necessarily like, because, you know, most of our life, let's be real, it's going to be lived in the gray space, like in the mundane. Like it's not going to be the high highs or the low lows. It's just going to be like every day getting your coffee. And to be able to find the joy and the simplicity of that, I think is such a kind skill to learn.
Yeah, Hol and I are
Absolutely.
very similar in that we like romanticize our lives. Those little moments, like listening to some daggy soundtrack and looking out a window in a train, and we could both be in tears, just being like, this is the best day of my life. And that was so much of what we learned in recovery, is like the external labels, the external events, the external peaks are so hollow in that they, as you say, are temporary. And I think that's so much of a little throwing back to what you were saying before in terms of like even some of those short-term highs and some of those messages that we're sending people, as far as like these labels are really important. Social media is a massive one as far as that comparison trap, and really sort of putting these parameters around what it is to be. Whenever I talk about success, I always put the caveat, whatever success is to you, because we have such fixed and limited and incredibly capitalistic label on what success is these days. What do you think are some of those areas which are contributing to sort of some of the struggles that young people are having, as far as like those modern elements, social media, that sort of aspect? Like even, you know, when I look at things, I love that you talk about finances, because it's something, as I said, that I was lacking. And particularly in this day and age, I can understand people, the generation behind me. If I feel cynical about my financial future and my security, I can only imagine how they're feeling. What do you think are some of those major contributors to people feeling levels of like hopelessness or despondence or just feeling lost?
It's a powerful word you said there, hopelessness. Like, I think hope is a huge thing. If I could give someone one thing, it'd probably be like hope, because that allows you to achieve all the other things we've mentioned. And without hope, it's like you just wake up, you don't even get out of bed, sort of thing. But yeah, I think social media is a huge one. I think everything for me comes back to community and loneliness. Like everything in life gets more enjoyable and easier when you've got good quality people around you. It's like if that's all you did in your 20s was fine, like 2, 3, 4 amazing people that are always there for you. Like, man, that's going to make everything so much easier. So I feel like I can strip everything back down to that. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of lack of communities. We're a lot more individualistic. You know, that culture has been pushed a huge amount, especially in Australia and like Western societies. Obviously, social media has made us a lot less social than, you know, our third place. Have you heard of that idea that we all have 3 places? We have our home, we have our work, and then a middle third place, which a lot of us are lacking that third place. And if you look at like our parents, I always use the example, my grandma, she joined something called the Metro Scooter Club back in like the 1960s, and they rode scooters all around the world, Australia, all around Australia. And if you meet her and ask her about her life, a lot of her conversations are going to be about that time. And once a year for the last 50 years, my grandma has hosted a barbecue where they all hang out. And so they're still friends 50 years later. They even got a cake that had 50 years of golden friendship. And a lot of them have passed away, but like that's a community. And I don't know where those are really existing for young people now. So to me, everything comes back to the idea that I like to simplify and just say, look, if you can get people around you, everything else becomes easier, because suddenly you start thinking, you get more inspired, you start looking at what you want to do in your career, you start looking at these different things. So that's why I harp on about the 6 out of 10 friends, the 6 out of 10 relationship. Like it is so dangerous because the enemy of a great life is a good one. And a lot of us have a good life, which prevents us from going for a great life. Or the enemy of a great friend is a good friend. Or a great friendship group is like a good friendship group. So that's where I like to like be careful of those ones, because everyone talks about like toxic friends, you got to get rid of them. That's kind of obvious if they're toxic. It's like, and it's not always obvious if they're toxic. It can take us a while. But I like to go on to the people that are not bad or toxic, but not amazing for you. I think that's a key thing. So yeah, that's probably my little summary if I was to choose it. Just friendships.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you as well, in terms of, obviously you have sort of all kinds of like demos who come to you, and obviously we're seeing some pretty scary stats as far as like mental health among young men, and which is why I think what you're doing is so incredibly powerful, because it is targeting some of these areas which from the ground up, it's becoming more and more evident how crucial it is that we address these things at an earlier and earlier point. Do you see that from the people coming into your program, as far as any clear or major difference between how young men are sort of battling with their mental health or some of these elements of being lost or lonely versus sort of other populations?
Yeah. Oh my God, it's huge. Like I can speak to my experiences, which is like, from my experiences, young women are thriving a lot more than young men. I think we do a masculine and feminine circle where we do a 2-hour session, and everyone loves that session. Like people absolutely love it. But I think the guys get something real special out of that, because it just never happens to have those conversations for them. I have volunteers and leaders, and I'm desperate for male volunteer and leaders. Like it's hard for me to get those. I have so many good female ones, like so many. So yeah, it's actually something I'm quite passionate about. I was talking to the team. I was like, what are your thoughts if I did a gendered program? Like, because I don't know, I like the idea of, I think for young men, if you look at like the role models, like you got like the Andrew Tate who go really far this way, and then you've kind of got people that are this side, and I feel like there's no one who's in between who's just doing like a healthy masculine thing. You got people who are like anti-masculinity, and you got people who are like really far this way, and I kind of want to be like, there's a lot of beauty around masculinity, let's not go too far this way and have these fun conversations. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential there. But yeah, I can say a lot of guys are struggling, like for sure. They're not sure, a lot of anxiety, they're just very awkward. They don't have much. It can be very tough. Like we did at a retreat, we did like a masculine feminine circles again, but we did a crossover, which was really cool, where we partnered up genders and we discussed what we'd been discussing. And I sat with one of the girls, and it was so good. I had such a good conversation with her, just hearing insights to like, some of the issues around femininity and some of the struggles, and then vice versa. So yeah, for me, I'm definitely seeing a huge struggle with men, which is really sad.
Yeah, I think it's when I heard about what you were doing, that was one of the things that jumped out to me, because I've been speaking in sort of like women's advocacy spaces for a long time, and it's often brought to us like, how do we fix this problem? And we're like, we're not sure. And to have you just so boldly and willingly like coming to this conversation and being that representation, because this conversation majority of the time has to happen amongst men, and the representation has to come from men. So I certainly hope you get more male volunteers in that area, because I really believe it is the entry point at which we can make a lot of change as far as what's happening culturally and how we can
even
have a healthier society for all of us.
Even like you said that you do like a advocacy for like female groups or something. Like I know a lot of female groups. Some of my friends, she's a woman speaking coach. I just met another woman who does like all these women coaching and stuff, but I don't know any for men. So like I think there's a lot of stuff happening for women, which is awesome to see, and very little for men. And I'm not sure why, if it's ego, if it's like I think there is a level of like men are less likely to like ask for help, and like and they they got to help themselves first. But it is something that I am looking at like exploring a lot more, because I think there is a little bit of a hole in the market, and it is something I'm passionate about. And I got a few guys that I think are really good role models, and guys that actually, my mate Josh, he just released a documentary on men's mental health, and it's so good. It's called The Drive.
Right.
And 4 of them, they went out into the Australian outback, and they bought cars for like $1,200, and they drove to Uluru back, and they like interviewed people along the way. And it's like a really lighthearted documentary of like mateship, and it's just really nice. But there's this one guy, probably like the most emotional part of the documentary. They just set a service station in like the middle of Australia, and Josh had his car covered in chalkboard paint, And what happens is he'd always like write quotes and people would come up and just draw everything on it. It was a really good conversation starter. And this guy's like, oh, what are you doing? And like, oh, we're shooting a documentary for mental health. And then he just goes on, oh, mental health, eh? And he starts talking about how, oh yeah, I've had my struggles. Like, there's one time where and he talked about how he hung a rope and he kicked himself off to try hang himself, and like goes into all these stories. And it was like out of nowhere, it was just like incredible. And he just like kind of walks off, and Josh like starts crying on camera. It was like, I don't know. I think he's a really good role model. He's my best mate. So yeah, I don't know how we got down this little
No,
funnel,
I
but it's
love
definitely
it.
something that I think
I think it's so
is
powerful.
important.
I think it is so important, because I think if anything, of course, we need men who are open to being vulnerable and talking about this men's work and getting really deep about, like, I think men do struggle with, it doesn't come as natural to them as it does to females to chitter chat with your best friend over a cup of tea and talk about your emotions, of course.
Yeah.
I think what we can do in the space, women and also men, is also just creating these safe containers where people feel like it's okay to be vulnerable. It's also important to be vulnerable, and almost like push up vulnerability as high as like success. Like ultimately, I feel like for someone to be able to be vulnerable, that is what, like, if we're coming back to authentic connection, that's how you create authentic connection. You don't get to have authentic connection if you're not being vulnerable. And then that loops back to this whole epidemic about loneliness. Like if we were able to authentically connect, male, female, man with man, woman, whatever it is, gender aside, I think this is one of the things that is one of the most fundamental aspects to lasting wellness, particularly for young people, but then also for young people to be able to create that really sturdy foundation that's going to take them across the rest of their life, and almost like moving away from so many of the pressures that young people face to like achieve all these goals and do all these things, but rather like bring it back to the basics. I think the world, particularly for young people, it can be so overly complex. Like they almost like have decision paralysis. There's too many things to do and there's too many ways to go, and it feels like there's so many definitive, like this is the wrong path, and there is no wrong path. Ultimately, I think if someone just reshifts that focus on getting to know themselves, that comes through authentic connection, it comes through creating good friends, it comes through really stabilizing your mental health and understanding who you are, that foundation is so much more sturdy for everything else that happens in life. But that movie sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, they're getting into schools. And the V word used there is a huge one, vulnerability. Like that's a massive part of the program. I'm not sure if our mutual friends spoke about it, but it's a huge part. Like in a day, like the first 2 days we do is the biggest event. Like we get a lot of tears come out, a lot of that vulnerability happens. And, our program values is BRAVE. It's an acronym, so you'll love it. I say like be brave, and we say belonging, resilience, authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy. And that's kind of the words that we use for the program. The vulnerability is probably my biggest one. Like and something I've learned, and this is a little bit of a hack to build deep connections, is like I agree, if you want to have deep connections, it's through vulnerability. And if people go, well, how do I get someone to be vulnerable with me? It's like, you need to get vulnerable first. Like vulnerability incites vulnerability. And I share a story in my program, which is like a very vulnerable story that I've spent a lot of time doing. And I share it in a moment where I'm trying to I do it strategically so that after that, they all feel they can get vulnerable. So that's a huge thing. I remember I was having a while ago when I first kind of recognized this. I was having dinner with my roommate, my best mate. We had like a red wine and a steak. And I had something really traumatic happen to me. And it was like happened with someone else as well. So I couldn't talk about it. And so my mum was like, look, you should just tell him. Like, don't tell anyone else, but just tell him. And I was like, all right. So I told him at this dinner, and then we started talking about it, got this deep conversation. And then he tells me something that he's going through. And then 2 hours later and 2 red bottles of wine, we're into a whole different, multiple conversations that the original conversation was way back here. And we have this amazing connection. And that's where I really felt connected with him. So it's one of the most important things. And I'd love for, more people to lean into that. If you're familiar with Brene Brown's work, she always talks about how vulnerability is a strength, and it takes grit and courage to be vulnerable, whereas a lot of men specifically see it as a weakness, and the greatest fear that men have is being perceived as weak. Absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack, but yeah.
And it's a skill too. We teach help seeking as a skill, and that's vulnerability, right? Where we often, and I think that this is true for both men and women, but certainly for men, where it's the last resort. It is a sign of weakness, right? It's the last thing that they'll tend to do. And I can speak even as a woman, I'm still a terrible help seeker. It is still something I actively have to work on. That instinct that goes, don't reach out, is my red flag, where I've got to text 3 people I've agreed to text when I have that thought. but it is something that we can teach people to be proactive with rather than reactive and letting everything get to crisis point and deteriorate or have it impacting all of these really core important areas of our life. You give me a lot of hope, Byron. This is such a key area, particularly for young men, and you are doing what you have identified things that government programs have been working for you to try to identify. You have something really powerful here.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, hopefully we can, expand it more and impact more people.
Yeah.
Byron, I think, would you be able to maybe share a story, anonymous, of course, of a young person that you've seen benefit from any of your programs?
Yeah. I mean, there's heaps. Like, I think there was something I always like to talk about. We had from a feedback form, one of our guys, and he loved it. Oh man, he had the most beautiful share at the end of the program. He was just like, I've never seen people be so open. I've never felt so safe. And he left in a feedback form. He was like, it's interesting. I've been in self-help and personal development for the last decade. Therefore, I was skeptical about what you're going to teach and what new ideas you're going to share. And as we finished DYX, our opening weekend in the program as a whole, I started to realize that I've spent so long reading about getting outside my comfort zone, I forgot to actually do it. And this is what that program has forced me to do. We've got couples, which I don't really promote because I don't encourage, we don't want it to be like it's not, you shouldn't be doing the program for that. But yeah, we do have couples. I had a guy who shared a big win in our channel like a year and a half after the program finished. And he was just like, man, like reflecting on like the last year and a half, like this program's completely changed my life. Like I was in a relationship that wasn't good for me. Now he met someone in the program and he was like, I'll invite you to our wedding, Byron. And like, he was just like saying like, I've done a complete 180. He's changed. He's got his dream job. And I'm not saying he's saying that the program is the reason he got all that, but he's just like, since the program, my whole life has done a complete 180 and it kind of pulled you out. So the program is like, it's like anything. It's like what you take out of it. For some people, it'll change the whole life. Others, it's just a fun 1 month. So it depends on like, if you actually do the work and if if it becomes a month that's just like a bit of a high and you have a really great 1 month and then you go back to where you were, or you actually make the changes and do what we say. It's only, there's only so much hand holding that we can do.
I think particularly, those stories from the men, it's just really powerful work. And I think, as someone who is providing services to young people, you're never going to really know what is it exactly that is going to make an impact. But I think so often it's almost a really beautiful thing to not necessarily know, but rather that it could have been something you said, or it could have been a moment of connection with someone, or it could have just been like the smallest possible thing for someone that could end up being one of those really important turning points in their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes people have said that like it was one thing one of my leaders said, like one compliment they gave them. And so I'm always like, when I've got like my leaders and my higher position people, I'm like, look, you guys, like, I know you just think you're normal people and you are, like, we're all just normal people. But when you're in the program, when you've got the shirt on and I position you as someone who's like a leader, like your words have weight. And it's really cool. Like, and that can be dangerous if I get the wrong people, or it can be really powerful if they like use that. And so, and we try to get, as you mentioned, we do get like very diverse range of people, which is really cool. And so we try to have like leaders that represent all different types of people, so someone can relate to one of our team in some way.
Yeah, awesome. I think, Byron, for a young person who might be feeling a little bit lost in the world, as we all feel from time to time, what is a couple of key pieces of advice that you would give them?
I think take risks.
Yeah.
Like everything we've already said this podcast, I think to probably just summarize what we've said, start taking risks. Like you're not going to grow inside your comfort zone. And if you're like, how do I take risks? And you're living at your parents' house and you're doing this with all the same people, I'd say get out of there. Like go move overseas for 6 months. And if you're not scared, if you're scared to get outside your comfort zone, put yourself in positions where you have to get outside your comfort zone. And when you move overseas or like go somewhere, like you have to get outside, you have to meet people, you have to do these things. So I think taking risks is a big one. Do some research. So all the stuff we mentioned, prioritize friendships, prioritize relationships, get clarity around your goals, your finances. This is important stuff that I know a lot of people just want to sweep under the rug and not thinking about it because it gives them anxiety or it stresses them out. And it's like, that's not going to solve the problem. Like it is going to stress you out and it can give you anxiety, but like you have to address that. And if you need to get help from people, like watch YouTube videos. You don't have to sign up to a program like mine. You can find it all for free or like through books and stuff. So like recognize that learning doesn't stop after uni. Learning is always happening. And, you got to prioritize these things around values is important as well. So I don't know, there's an infinite list I could share, but maybe go back to the 4 Cs. I think they're the 4 areas I think we should be focusing on in our 20s, like gaining more confidence, which is by getting outside your comfort zone, by getting rejected, by failing and building resilience. That's how you get more confident. Gaining more clarity by researching, finding out, how to get control of your money, what are your values, those sorts of things. Getting connections, investing in yourself to go to clubs or communities and put yourself out there and have vulnerable conversations, and then community, which connection and community have some crossovers there. But that's probably what I'd say.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I think our listeners have so much to take away from this conversation, but for anyone who would like to find out more about what you're offering, what's on the horizon for Young Driven, what can people expect, and how can we find out a bit more information about you and everything you're doing?
Yeah, I'm getting back into content, so the podcast and everything, which I haven't done for a while. So if you want to hear the podcast, it's just the Driven Young podcast. Just search it up anywhere. If you want to find out what we're doing, drivenyoung.com, or go to our Instagram, Driven Young Program. Like if you just search us, we've got a pretty good presence online. But yeah, right now we only have offerings to people in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane in August. Anyone overseas, there's nothing I got to sell to you. Just listen to the podcast. Or I think one thing, if any of the listeners are here, if you go to drivenyoung.com or go to Instagram, we do have a quiz, which is it's called Are You Thriving in Your 20s quiz. And I mentioned it earlier, it's 40 questions. They're all like science-backed questions or like psychology-backed questions, and it covers 5 different areas in your life. And you answer those, and it's going to kind of just show you the different areas you can improve on. It also will give you a custom 38-page report, which breaks down all your results and shows you different areas to improve. That's all free. You can all go do that. And that's probably what I'd say if you want to check out what we're doing.
Incredible. We'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes, and obviously, but we'll pop all of this up on social media as well. But we're so thankful that you've taken the time to chat to us today. This has been a really powerful conversation for so many different reasons. I have no doubt our listeners are going to get so much out of it.
Well, thanks for coming on. I think it's great what you guys are doing. Like, I don't know how much our mutual friend told you about the program, but there's a few things we do in the program where they get really, really vulnerable and deep. And I can't tell you how often eating disorders comes up. I feel like it's like every girl. Like if it's not every girl, it's like 1 in every 5 girls is the one who doesn't have something that they've mentioned. Whether it was like a crippling version or just something I've dealt with, it's like very, very prevalent. I think in guys, there's a lot of it in guys that they don't even realize it's eating disorders. So I think it's a really important thing you guys are working on. And I love to see that you're making it like actionable and you're going to do these things. So yeah, good on you. I love it.
Amazing. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, guys.